Monday morning. 8:12 a.m. My toothbrush foamed in my mouth, mint burning my tongue, when the phone buzzed on the sink. I glanced down, still half distracted, expecting a work reminder. Instead, 4 lines blinked up at me, sharp as glass. I want a divorce. All communication through my lawyer. No fight. No warning. No explanation. Just a wall slammed down. I froze, toothbrush in hand, the steam from the shower fogging the mirror. My chest tightened, but my fingers moved with strange calm. By 8:27, I had typed a single word back. Understood. And just like that, 15 years of marriage ended in silence. I left the bathroom light on that morning, though I usually turned it off. The faint hum of the fan filled the hallway as I carried my coffee into the kitchen. The house was still, almost too still, and I noticed for the first time how hollow it sounded when my footsteps crossed the wooden floor. Routine had always been my anchor. Wake up early, shave, brush, coffee, a simple breakfast, and then work. My job in finance wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills, kept the lights on, and let me set something aside each month. I was proud of that, though I never said it out loud. Providing felt like a quiet kind of love. The kitchen table was scarred with faint scratches from years of use. Sunday papers had left faint ink marks, and the corner bore a shallow groove from when our niece once pressed too hard coloring with crayons. My wife used to complain about how worn it looked, suggesting we buy something new, but I always resisted. To me, those marks were history, proof we had lived here, laughed here, eaten late-night takeout here. I sat at that same table now, coffee cooling in my hands, staring at the phone screen again. Her message glared at me like a wound. I had expected fights, maybe silence, even tears if our marriage ever reached its breaking point. But a cold text, on a Monday morning, between brushing my teeth and buttering toast? No, that I hadn't expected. Work still waited though. I logged into my laptop, the screen lighting up with the familiar rows of spreadsheets. Numbers were steady, predictable. They never woke up one morning and told you they wanted out. By mid-morning, I slipped into my usual rhythm, checking transactions, flagging errors, sending off quiet, polite emails. Coworkers often called me steady. Not brilliant, not flashy, but someone they could count on. I liked it that way. Steady meant reliable. Steady meant trusted. That afternoon, I stepped out for lunch. The small cafe down the street smelled of ground beans and buttered bread. The barista, a young man with an easy smile, already knew my order. Black coffee, turkey sandwich, no mayo. You're always on time, he said, ringing me up. Habit. I replied with a shrug. It was true. I liked habits. I liked knowing what came next. But marriage, I realized as I carried my tray to a corner table, had slowly become a habit too, a routine that gave me shape. And now, with a single message, someone had broken it without even saying why. I chewed slowly, my thoughts circling. She had once laughed at how predictable I was. You're the kind of man who'll eat the same breakfast for 40 years, she'd tease, pouring herself another cup of tea. Maybe she was right. Maybe that steadiness that once made me dependable, now made me dull. Back at the office, the hours blurred until evening. When I returned home, the silence of the house pressed down heavier than before. No clink of keys on the counter, no humming in the shower upstairs, no faint aroma of her favorite perfume. Just my own footsteps echoing back at me. I made myself dinner, pasta, nothing special, and ate at the same scratched table. The chair across from me sat empty, untouched, and for the first time I noticed how wide the table seemed when only one plate rested on it. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling fan. Its blades turned in slow circles, steady and endless, while my phone glowed on the nightstand with that single, final message. Understood, I had replied. But truthfully, I didn't understand at all. I met Claire when I was 28, at a friend's barbecue. She wore a sundress the color of ripe peaches, laughing with her head thrown back, sunlight catching in her hair. She had a way of drawing people in, magnetic without trying. I was quieter, more cautious, the kind of man who hovered near the grill, making small talk about the weather. She found me anyway. You look like you'd rather be anywhere else, she said, balancing a plate of corn and salad. I smiled, awkward. Crowds aren't really my thing. Then lucky for you, I like small groups, she replied, sliding into the empty chair beside me. That was the start. We spent that whole afternoon talking, and by the time the sky turned lavender, I already knew she'd change my life. And she did, for a long time, in ways that felt good. She introduced me to new restaurants, new music, new friends. She said I steadied her, kept her from drifting, while she pulled me out of my shell. We balanced each other, or so I thought. The first crack appeared years later, small, almost invisible. She started staying late at work more often, claiming deadlines, team dinners, new responsibilities. I believed her. Why wouldn't I? She had always been ambitious, and I admired that about her. But then came the nights she wouldn't answer my calls until nearly midnight, her voice too bright, too rehearsed. I noticed perfume I didn't recognize, a sharper scent than the soft floral she used to wear. When I asked, she waved it off. Samples from the office. You worry too much. I wanted to trust her. So I did. Still, unease grew. At family gatherings, she grew distant, picking at her food, glued to her phone. She laughed less at my jokes. When I suggested a weekend trip, just the two of us, she sighed like I had asked her to climb a mountain barefoot. Work is exhausting enough, she said. The last thing I need is more travel. So we stayed home. I thought maybe it was just a phase. Marriages had seasons, didn't they? Maybe this was simply a cold stretch before the thaw. But then there was the Christmas party. Her company rented out a hotel ballroom, and for the first time, I saw the life she lived without me. She sparkled in that room, gliding from one group to another, laughing, touching arms, leaning close. I stood at the edge with a drink, smiling politely at strangers who barely asked my name. When she finally introduced me, it was quick, almost dismissive. "This is Daniel, my husband," she said, before turning back to her colleagues. I felt like a footnote in her story. On the drive home, I tried to tell her how left out I'd felt. She gripped the wheel tight, her jaw stiff. "Not everything has to be about you," she snapped. The words stung. I went quiet. After that, silence became more common between us. Meals eaten in front of separate screens. Weekends spent in different rooms. I still tried, making her coffee just the way she liked it, surprising her with small gifts, offering to cook when she was tired. She accepted with a smile, sometimes, but her eyes were elsewhere. Then came the lie I couldn't ignore. She said she was flying out for a 3-day work conference. But on the second night, I found her jacket still hanging in the hallway closet. The ticket she showed me later had the wrong dates. When I asked directly, her face hardened. "You're imagining things," she said. "God, you always need proof for everything." And maybe she was right. I did need proof. So I stopped pressing. I told myself I was overthinking. That was easier than facing the possibility of betrayal. The final blow wasn't an affair I caught red-handed. It wasn't even a fight. It was her distance turning into indifference. The way she no longer looked up when I walked into the room. The way her good night sounded like an obligation instead of affection. I should have seen the text coming. All the signs were there. But the coldness of it, the way 15 years collapsed into one curt message, still felt like someone had poured ice water over my chest. Looking back, I realized betrayal doesn't always explode. Sometimes it's a slow erosion, quiet as dust collecting on shelves. One day you wake up, and the person beside you has already left in every way that matters. Her message wasn't the start of the end. It was just the final period on a story that had been over for a long time. The first hours after her text felt strangely mechanical. I brushed my teeth. I put on a shirt. I made coffee. My hands moved like clockwork while my chest buzzed with a dull electricity. By 8:27, I had already typed understood. That single word felt like a wall I could hide behind. No begging. No arguing. Just acknowledgement. But silence isn't the end. Silence creates echoes. At 10 a.m., I was at my laptop, pulling up every financial account we shared. Numbers steadied me in a way emotions couldn't. I froze the joint credit cards, canceled her Amex, moved half of our joint checking into a separate account under legal protection, locked the family savings so neither of us could touch it without consent. Click after click, I built a fortress. By noon, I'd sent her a second message. "Your access to all shared financial accounts has been restricted pending legal division." Per your request, communication will now be through legal channels only. I stared at the screen, waiting for a reply that never came. Instead, at 2:17 p.m. the next day, my phone lit up with her sister's number. I answered out of habit. "What the hell did you do?" she snapped before I could say hello. Her voice cracked high with panic. "Claire is sobbing. She says you blindsided her financially. She can't even buy groceries." My jaw tightened. She asked for a divorce and for legal-only contact. I complied. There was a pause, then a hissed "You're cruel," before the line went dead. That night, 6:45 p.m., an email arrived. Subject: Urgent spousal financial interference. It was from her lawyer. The words felt like they'd been dipped in acid. Financial abuse. Emergency motion. Threats of legal action. My chest burned, but I forced myself to read every line carefully. Then I opened a folder, attached transaction logs, dates, amounts, receipts. Even a grocery delivery confirmation from the day after her text. Bags photographed at her doorstep. Proof she wasn't abandoned. I sent it all to my lawyer, along with a copy of her original message demanding legal-only contact. His reply came within the hour. "Smart move. Don't speak to her. Don't respond to family. Stay the course." That night, for the first time in months, I slept 8 hours straight. But the war wasn't over. Wednesday morning, 11:22 a.m., her lawyer called mine again. This time, their tone had shifted from venom to polished concern. They wanted a temporary support order, claiming she was trapped financially. No access to groceries, gas, essentials. I sat at my desk, staring at the papers spread out like puzzle pieces. I handed over proof of deliveries, car insurance paid, utilities covered. Everything but her discretionary spending was accounted for. She has food, water, shelter, Wi-Fi, transportation. My lawyer said firmly. She's not trapped. She just doesn't have unlimited spending. Still, the accusations didn't stop. Thursday morning, a mutual friend DM'd me. "You're being cruel. You're punishing her." I stared at the message for a long time, thumbs hovering. Then I typed one sentence. She asked to speak through lawyers. I'm respecting her boundaries. No reply came. By Friday, 10:47 a.m., my lawyer forwarded me a voicemail. Her lawyer's voice was different now, rushed, almost pleading. "Please have your client contact me directly. We need to revisit temporary support and discuss cooperative negotiation. I'd prefer to avoid escalation." The same man who threatened me 48 hours earlier now sounded like someone standing on thin ice. I played it twice, headphones pressed tight, listening for cracks in his confidence. He knew. They both knew. She had made a move without a plan, expecting me to unravel. Instead, I'd gone quiet. I'd built walls. And silence, it turned out, was sharper than any argument. The conflict wasn't just about money, it was about control. She had expected a spectacle. Tears, rage, begging. But my restraint, my calm execution, had turned her strategy inside out. And for the first time, I felt the faintest spark of something new. Not triumph, not yet, but the stirring of resolve. This wasn't just survival. This was the beginning of my revenge. Nights used to be the worst. Even before the text, before the lawyers, before the financial fortress. I'd lie awake listening to the rhythm of her silence. She had a way of turning in bed that told me everything without words. Back angled away. Phone tilted just enough that the glow didn't reach me. Her breathing, shallow, clipped. 100 small rejections lined up in the dark. I used to roll over, whisper her name. Sometimes she'd pretend to be asleep. Sometimes she'd sigh and say, "Not tonight." Sometimes nothing at all. I'd stare at the ceiling then, counting faint cracks in the plaster, wondering how love could sour so quietly. After the text, the silence was heavier, but it no longer felt like a cage. It felt like air. Empty, yes, but breathable. Still, I couldn't escape the churn of thought. My mind kept circling back to the same images. The morning she stopped making eye contact at breakfast. The way she told friends stories where I was always the forgetful one. The careless one, the burden. The pity in their eyes when they glanced at me across the dinner table. She'd been rehearsing this role for years. I'd been cast as the antagonist in her private play, and I hadn't even realized. The night after her lawyer's voicemail, I couldn't sleep again. I got up, padded barefoot across the cold floor, and sat at the dining table with nothing but a glass of water. My laptop screen glowed in the dark, casting long shadows on the wall. I pulled up the transaction logs again. Not because I needed to, every number was already etched into my memory, but because the rows and columns grounded me. Rent paid. Utilities covered. Grocery orders confirmed. Nothing cruel, nothing reckless. For years, I'd been accused of being cold. You don't talk about your feelings, she'd say. You just manage things. She was right. I did manage things. The mortgage. The bills. The car payments. Her life. But in that quiet kitchen, I realized something. The very skill she mocked was the one saving me now. My discipline. My ability to execute without flinching. I let the thought settle. It felt dangerous, like holding a blade. I leaned back, the chair creaking under my weight. For months, maybe years, I'd been shrinking myself to keep the peace, lowering my voice, swallowing my words, bending under the weight of her moods. And for what? To be discarded by text? I closed my eyes, exhaled slowly. No tears came. I thought they would, but they didn't. What I felt instead was a slow ignition, like a pilot light finally catching flame. Not anger, not even hatred. Something steadier. Resolve. If she wanted a clean break, she would have one, but not on her terms. No drama. No spectacle. Just the truth, laid bare. Numbers, facts, reality. She wanted me cast as the villain in her story. But I wouldn't perform anymore. I'd rewrite the script in silence, one document, one hearing, one ruling at a time. I thought back to all the times I'd let myself be managed. The way she'd sulk for days if I disagreed. The way she'd whisper complaints to her sister, knowing it would circle back to me. The way she wielded pity like a blade, drawing sympathy from everyone else while I stood in the shadows, painted as cold. Maybe I was cold, but maybe cold was what kept steel from bending. By dawn, my decision was clear. I wasn't going to rage or plead. I wasn't going to chase her or defend myself in whispered corners of gossip. I was going to fight her the way she least expected, with discipline, with silence, with truth documented so precisely that not even her lawyer could twist it. When the sun rose, pale light spilling across the kitchen table, I felt something I hadn't in years. Control. And beneath that, something even rarer. Freedom. Strategy, I realized, wasn't about winning. It was about not losing myself again. The morning after that long night at the kitchen table, I called my lawyer and set up a meeting. His office smelled faintly of old leather and coffee when I walked in, familiar, grounding. He leaned back in his chair, listening carefully as I explained everything. Good move freezing the accounts, he said. Clean. Documented. Professional. Most people flail in the first weeks. You didn't. I nodded, though inside I felt a twitch of doubt. I wasn't built for this kind of war. My strength had always been in patience, in showing up for work, in keeping the roof steady. Now I was supposed to wield that steadiness like a weapon. We drew up a plan. No direct communication. Everything filtered through him. Every financial document prepared in advance. Every transaction logged, cross-checked, time-stamped. It was the opposite of how she operated. She thrived on drama, on sudden turns of emotion, on the power of catching me off guard. My shield would be boring precision. Still, shields get heavy. The first setback came quick. Her sister called, voice sharp, accusing. She's crying, saying you blindsided her. You froze her cards like she's nothing. I held the phone away for a moment, staring at the sunlight flickering across the floor. Then I answered, calm. She requested legal-only contact. I'm respecting her wishes. A beat of silence. Then the line clicked dead. But their whispers spread. Mutual friends began circling, subtle comments in group chats. Are you sure you're not being too harsh? Or she's going through so much right now. Each message felt like sandpaper against my skin. I wanted to defend myself, to explain the quiet years of coldness, the thousand small cuts. But I didn't. Instead, I kept the records. Groceries delivered, photos saved. Utility bills paid, receipts archived. Even gas for her car, topped off before the text. I made sure she had everything she needed, except control over me. Her lawyer struck next, filing a motion for emergency financial relief. They accused me of trapping her, of financial abuse. The word stung more than I expected. Abuse. That was the role she'd been trying to paint for years, now written in legal ink. My lawyer and I sat at his desk, reviewing the motion. He looked up at me, steady. We fight with facts. So I pulled the evidence: transaction logs, screenshots, delivery confirmations. A neat timeline of support. We sent it. 2 days later, her lawyer's tone changed. Less threat, more negotiation. Perhaps we can revisit temporary support cooperatively, his voicemail said, voice rushed, almost pleading. It was the first crack in their armor. But cracks don't mean collapse. At the preliminary hearing, she demanded $6,000 a month. Lifestyle maintenance, her lawyer argued. As if the silence, the cold shoulders, the curated pity had been luxuries I owed her. I sat there, palms pressed to my knees, as my lawyer laid out the spreadsheets. Income, expenses, assets. The text. The judge listened, face unreadable, then leaned forward. Let me get this straight, he said, voice measured. Your client unilaterally severed communication, insisted on legal-only contact, and now expects continued financial entanglement? Her lawyer stumbled, muttered something about emotional incompatibility. Motion denied. The judge said flatly. Support capped at $1,500. I exhaled, slow, controlled. My lawyer leaned in and whispered. That was surgical. But victories come with shadows. That night, I lay awake again, staring at the ceiling. My body was tired, but my mind churned. I wasn't celebrating. I was replaying every moment she'd painted me as cruel, detached, unfeeling. Now, even when I'd acted with precision and care, the whispers still floated. He's punishing her. He's cold. The setback wasn't in the courtroom. It was in me. Because no amount of documentation could erase the way people looked at me now. With quiet suspicion, as though my silence itself was a crime. Still I pressed on. One day at a time. Paper trails over explanations. Boundaries over begging. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't triumphant. But it was working. And little by little, I felt the weight shifting. Not gone but bearable. The courthouse smelled faintly of dust and coffee, its marble floors echoing each step like a slow drumbeat. I sat on the hard wooden bench, suit pressed, hands folded loosely in my lap. On the other side of the aisle, she sat beside her lawyer. Hair styled perfectly, expression composed, but her foot tapped against the floor, quick, restless. For weeks, this moment had loomed. Every whisper from friends, every sharp message from her sister, every late-night doubt had pointed here. Not a dramatic showdown, not raised voices or slammed doors, just paperwork, facts, and the quiet weight of truth. Her lawyer rose first. Your Honor, my client is simply asking for fairness. For 15 years, she has been financially dependent on her husband. He managed the accounts, the investments, the income. She trusted him. Now, after requesting a divorce, she finds herself cut off, blindsided, unable to maintain the lifestyle they built together. She is entitled to $6,000 a month in temporary support. He spoke smoothly, confidently, painting her as the abandoned spouse. She lowered her eyes at just the right moment, a picture of quiet suffering. I almost admired the performance. Almost. Then my lawyer stood. No theatrics. Just a file in his hand. Your Honor, let's review the timeline. He clicked open a binder. Page after page. Monday, 8:12 a.m. Wife sends husband this text. I want a divorce. All communication through my lawyer. Husband replies at 8:27 a.m. Understood. That same day, husband transfers half the joint checking balance into a separate legal account. His right, and in fact his obligation to protect assets. He freezes joint credit cards, but ensures all household bills remain paid. He handed the judge a neatly organized packet. Here are the transaction logs. Mortgage paid. Utilities current. Grocery deliveries confirmed, with photographic proof of bags delivered to the marital home. Even gasoline for her vehicle was provided. She had food, shelter, internet, transportation. Everything necessary, Accept unrestricted spending. The judge flipped through the packet, eyebrows raised slightly. My lawyer continued, voice even. To be clear, Your Honor, my client complied precisely with her request for legal-only contact. He did not engage in harassment. He did not retaliate financially. He ensured her needs were met, while respecting her stated boundary. To call this financial abuse is not only inaccurate, it is an insult to real cases of abuse. A hush settled over the courtroom. Even the clerk seemed to pause mid-typing. Her lawyer shifted, clearing his throat. Your Honor, we are not disputing that some expenses were covered. But this is about lifestyle. For years The judge cut him off, voice firm. Lifestyle maintenance is not a blank check. She chose to sever communication. She cannot both demand distance and expect unlimited financial entanglement. Motion denied. Temporary support capped at $1,500 a month. Silence. Then the faint scratch of the clerk's pen noting the order. Across the aisle, her face tightened, the mask slipping for just a second. Shock maybe. Or disbelief. She had expected me to stumble, to lash out, to fail improving my steadiness. Instead, the very thing she mocked me for, my cold precision, had become the blade that cut her case apart. My lawyer leaned closer, whispering again. Surgical. I didn't smile. Not in that moment. I simply breathed. Slow, steady, measured. For the first time in years, I wasn't defending myself against her moods, her whispers, her performances. I wasn't the villain in her story. I was simply free. The truth had spoken louder than her script. And it had been quiet. 3 months later, the house was still mine. The living room looked different now. Less crowded, less curated. The floral throw pillows she'd insisted on were gone, boxed up and taken to her sister's place. The shelves, once filled with trinkets she'd collected during weekend shopping trips, now stood simple and bare, holding only books, a few framed photographs, and the potted fern I watered every other day. It felt quieter, yes, but not empty. One Saturday morning, I brewed coffee in the kitchen. The smell of dark roast filled the air, rich and grounding. I leaned against the counter, mug warm in my hands, and realized something. This was the first weekend in years that wasn't dictated by someone else's plan. No errands I hadn't agreed to, no social gatherings where I stood silent while she performed her charm, no sharp arguments whispered in the car ride home. Just me. Just peace. The divorce had been finalized with little fanfare. Papers signed, assets divided, her moving truck idling outside for less than an hour. She didn't look at me when she carried the last box out. She didn't say goodbye. And I didn't ask her to. For weeks after, friends called. Some out of genuine concern. Others out of curiosity thinly disguised. Are you holding up okay? They'd ask, their voices careful, like I might break if touched. I told them I was fine. It wasn't a lie. Not entirely. At night, I still lay awake sometimes, the ceiling fan spinning shadows across the walls. My mind replayed old arguments, words I'd swallowed, moments I'd let slip past because it was easier than fighting. I wondered how long I'd lived like that without noticing the weight pressing down. But then morning would come, sunlight slipping through the curtains, and I'd feel it again, that strange, surprising lightness. I started walking in the evenings. At first just around the block, hands in my pockets, the cool air settling in my lungs. Then longer routes, through the park, past the small lake where kids toss breadcrumbs to ducks. I'd nod at neighbors, exchange brief hellos. Simple connections, unremarkable but grounding. I also found myself cooking again. Real meals, not just takeout containers or quick sandwiches. I'd chop vegetables slowly, the rhythm of knife against cutting board almost meditative. The first time I sat down with a plate of roasted chicken and potatoes I'd made myself, I laughed quietly at how foreign it felt. A meal without tension, without criticism. Her absence was loud in certain ways. The silence of the phone, no constant buzzing of demands. The lack of perfume clinging to the hallway. The missing second toothbrush by the sink. But it was also a kind of silence that gave me room to breathe, to hear my own thoughts. One evening, while sorting through the last of the paperwork, I found a stack of letters, birthday cards, anniversary notes. I read them carefully, scanning the practiced handwriting, the affectionate words that, in hindsight, felt more like performance than truth. For a moment, I felt the old sting of betrayal. But instead of tearing them up, I placed them gently back in the box, taped it shut, and carried it to the attic. Not to forget, just to put it away. The shift wasn't dramatic. It didn't happen all at once. It was small, steady, like a tide receding, leaving the shore clear again. I realized revenge hadn't been fire or fury. It hadn't been shouting or winning some grand dramatic showdown. My revenge had been silence. Steadiness. Refusing to play the role she wanted me to play. And in the end, it wasn't really about her at all. It was about me. About finally learning that peace could be louder than chaos. That freedom could be found not in taking something back, but in letting something go. One evening, months after the papers were signed, I sat on the back porch with a cup of coffee cooling between my palms. The sky stretched wide and pale above me, streaked with orange and violet, the last of the sun sinking behind the trees. I listened to the crickets starting their chorus, the steady hum of life carrying on. The air smelled faintly of cut grass from a neighbor's yard. Simple things, but they filled me in a way I hadn't felt in years. I thought back to that morning when her message appeared, sharp and final on my phone screen. I remembered the steam on the mirror, the toothbrush frozen in my hand, the way my chest clenched but my fingers stayed calm. At the time, I'd thought I was only surviving. But now I understood. That single word I typed, understood, had been more than a reply. It had been a turning point. By refusing to beg, rage, or crumble, I had protected more than just my savings. I had protected myself. For so long, I believed strength meant holding on, fighting harder, proving worth. But strength, I realized, sometimes meant walking away without noise. Sometimes it meant choosing stillness over spectacle, truth over performance. I took a slow sip of coffee. The mug was chipped along the rim, but it didn't matter. It was mine. Inside, the house was quiet but not hollow. My books lined the shelves. My jacket hung on the chair. My life, simple as it was, finally belonged to me. The world hadn't collapsed. I hadn't been destroyed. In fact, I'd never felt more steady. I looked out at the fading sky, the first stars starting to pierce through. Somewhere beyond these walls, she was living her version of freedom. And I didn't begrudge her that. We had both made choices. We had both walked away. But for the first time in years, I wasn't looking back. The night air cooled against my skin. I set the empty mug down beside me, leaned back in the chair, and let the silence settle. Not the silence of loss. The silence of peace.